All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to meeting 16. Just as a reminder, I am recording this. We've got about 22 folks going here, so we can get going. A few things to hit today. Why don't we start? Tim, did you have any luck or any discussions or updates on the OPC straw man?
So I had sent out last week, and bear with me, I'm still kind of switching gears here.
No, you're fine.
But I had sent out last week a bit of an update on some citations,
Right.
and we're still kind of considering some of the positions that I think need to be. Well, I think that we need discussions in this forum around potentially finding consensus points that align with what we've kind of pulled in through our straw man. Because I think that we've talked through a lot of it, and I think there are points of consensus in there.
Sure.
So yeah, I think that was kind of my goal.
Okay. All right. Well, do you want to kick things off with that then? I mean, I know it seemed like the biggest point of contention was the type of hearing. And I know there's obviously you guys want it to be more of a litigated proceeding versus the utilities want it to be more of an informational / legislative type proceeding.
Yeah, so we were working towards having a meeting with the utilities. I think we had gone back and forth on this, and I think where it wound up leaving off is that so let me actually pull up Ethan had sent us an email. I believe
I can actually chime in here too, Judge McLean. We have been in contact with BGE and other folks about having a meeting, to discuss our straw proposal, maybe reach some consensus. We did get an email from BGE yesterday that I believe indicates that they don't feel a meeting would be fruitful anymore. I think that the rationale, and I don't want to speak for BGE. I think they're on the call. Yeah, Ethan's on the call, so he can explain. But I think that their BGE's perspective might be informed by the fact that they're operating under an MRP, and that there's going to be an MRP lessons learned element in that case. And so, at least for BGE, maybe the merits of having a discussion about the DSP process isn't going to be fruitful. But I will say that we have been contacted by other utilities, and it would still be OPC's intention to move forward with a meeting with those folks, to see if we can maybe reach some middle ground, regarding our trial proposal, which, as you mentioned, I think that the main sticking point is what the nature of the commission's oversight will be. We really feel that it's necessary for there to be a proceeding in which stakeholder and utility disagreement on certain issues can be ruled on by the commission. So I guess we can say it's like a fully litigated proceeding. I think even under what the utilities have said thus far, that discovery would be taken under, I think, anybody's proposal. That's litigation in a sense. I think it would be our hope that moving forward, at least at some point, the commission would essentially be deciding the approval of DSP plans on a consensus or a near consensus basis. But we would like there to be an opportunity, to the extent that there was no consensus was reached, for the commission to be presented with the various issues and then to make a decision.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Ethan.
Little disambiguation. First, the point that we wanted to have a discussion on with OPC out on the outside was simply the timing issue, and how to work with them on their straw man on how its timing could be better aligned with MRP and construction plans. Obviously we in the OPC disagree about the scope of the proceeding. We are all for filing our plans and it being like the annual performance report. People are free to ask discovery, but it is not a decisional point for the commission, but rather an informational point. Is our position there. Happy to join their conversation when they want to put together meetings with the other utilities to discuss the structure of the proceeding that they're looking at. That's a conversation I thought was not on the table 2 weeks ago. So Jake, happy to have that conversation with you. So just it's the timing part, though. When I talked to the BG&E and PHI MYP teams, they pointed out that we are about to go into a proceeding, the lessons learned proceeding, where all of these things will be captured, and there are multiple points in the multiple pieces of different proceedings, and I can drop the footnotes that I sent out last night in the chat. Here we go. I'm going to drop in just the footnotes of the draft recommendation I sent out last night. These are the various documents that where OPC and staff and others have weighed in and felt that the DSP should be inform MYP cases. And that is something that a lot of our people have very much taken to heart and want to make sure that we get a result that does that for staff and OPC when we go into these MYPs. This was seen as a supplement to the MYPs, the DSP. If you look at the course of the commission's commentary and others' commentary on it. So that's those 3 footnotes, just lays out where you can find those comments. And so we just wanted to make sure that proceeding is where the lessons learned proceeding is where any schedule is set, because otherwise we would be it would be premature for us to set a schedule. But back to the style of the proceeding, the scope, whatever you'd like to call it, we'd be happy to join with OPC and other utilities in that conversation. Did not know that was an open conversation with OPC, but if they are willing to discuss that, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ethan. I will say that I did understand that that the timing was going to be the crux of that call, but I think that the timing was also involved the issue of what the nature of the proceeding will be. And I understand BGE's position as a utility that is now in their second MRP, and the idea of the merits of having the DSP and the MYP process consistent with one another. But this is a work group that's dealing with utilities that operate under traditional rate structures as well as MYPs. And so when we're bringing forth a position, we're trying to come up with a process that would apply regardless of the rate structure under which a utility is operating. And then, when it comes to the timing, that sort of thing, we've thrown that out there as a straw proposal. We're not locked into the start dates or whether BGE would come first or whether PHI or SMECO and PE. We were just putting thoughts down on paper to sort of illustrate how we viewed the reports being filed and the process being handled on a staggered basis to kind of reduce administrative burdens.
And I appreciate any reduction in administrative burdens. So happy to have that conversation with you all. And we threw out that recommendation. Simply, one of the things that we've been in our final look through this proceeding, we've been looking at just where certain items should be most appropriately handled by the SMEs. I can't always speak. We can't always speak here who are representing BG&E and PHI. We can't speak for every portion of our organization all the time. And the DSP proceeding here we've gone in a lot of places. We've touched on so many pieces of how the system is run. We've discussed reliability, we've discussed Empower, and many of those we just want to make sure stay with the SMEs and the stakeholders who have been with those particular proceedings, and that some of the decisions we're making here should be more to inform and send recommendations to them. and let them handle that inside of their proceeding. It's one of our areas of just making sure that this remains. And as you said, Jacob, the minimize the administrative burden by not creating multiple proceedings, making conflicting decisions about various facets of DSP that are kind of in other areas. So that's one of our areas of interest right now as we shut down and look at a final stage of this proceeding. So hope we can work with you on that. Appreciate your forthrightness here.
Ethan, would the timing issue potentially, potentially be solved by the type of hearing or type of process by which the commission considers these plans or filings?
I could be. I'm willing to,
Or is it even worth pursuing something rather than kind of a one size fits all for the utilities in terms of a timing aspect? Is it something that we should consider creating a MRP specific time frame?
And that was one thing that one of the main points of our straw man, and when we worked with the other utilities to work on it with them to develop it, is looking for a way to make sure that we were accommodating all of the utilities' various, populations, geographies, planning cycles. Make sure that we created a straw man that was flexible so that we could all implement it in the way that most to the benefit of our customers and our systems. And I see Damon is his hand raised, and I should probably let him speak for them on this one, since they have a somewhat different situation than us.
I think you're muted, Damon.
Oh, yeah.
No, still can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
How about now?
Yeah, we got it now.
There we go. Okay. Sorry.
You're
We
fine.
don't have the most sophisticated portals sometimes. In any event, thanks, Ethan. So I think, Judge, you sort of hit on the catchphrase that we've certainly been trying to advance since the beginning of this proceeding, is that one size does not fit all. And in the case of SMECO, we have no plans to file on MYP, at least in any time in the future, and probably in the long foreseeable future. And so that type of an alignment does not make sense for us. And so I do think your point about making sure that whatever recommendations, rules ultimately come out of this proceeding are tailored to the unique aspects of each utility is really important, and especially in the case of a cooperative like SMECO. And I'm sure you're aware there's been some legislation tossed around this session that tries to at least provide some direction to the commission on appreciating those differences. Whether it'll pass or not, who knows at this point. But regardless, the point is really important from our perspective. And as you sort of articulated, we want to make sure that we're not caught in sort of there's unintended consequences of focusing on an MYP to the exclusion of utilities like us that are going to continue with a historic rate case proceeding, and that there probably needs to be a separate proceeding for DSP in our case, simply because the historic test year may not align as much with sort of that forward-looking planning process. So I'll pause there. Happy to entertain any questions, but I think that's sort of our immediate thought there.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Anybody have any takes on Damon's thoughts? You've satisfied everyone.
Great. Lock into the track. Thanks.
Thank you. Jacob, welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to clarify one thing and add on to some of the stuff Ethan was saying. Timing is a broad term, and I think within this discussion of the straw proposal, there's multiple aspects of timing, right? There's the January 1st aspect of the proposal, which I think, not that I was part of last meeting, but catching up on, I think, was a challenge in terms of how does that align with existing planning cycles, with a typical planning cycle, and how can that maybe better shift? But then there's also, obviously, as Ethan mentioned, the timing with MYPs, as well as just the timing of, going through a stakeholder process and going through a review process with stakeholders and a filing just 1 year before an implementation plan. And I think we had put that in our comments, as well as that timing also presents a challenge. So just recognizing that there's lots of aspects of that timing that then present different challenges, and there may be areas within those different aspects that we can work towards consensus or may continue to be challenges.
Well, it sounds like the timing, I agree with you. There's multiple timing issues, but it seems, excuse me, it doesn't seem, I guess the timing of the cycles might be easier to address than, I guess, the timing of the MRPs.
Yeah, I would agree
Right.
in terms of like the January filing. If I think we could certainly find a point of consensus of where does that best fit with
Yeah. I mean,
typical planning cycle.
right. And now, Jacob, Tim, I think you said your January filing date was just an example. So my guess is you guys should probably live with a different month, depending on when when a particular utility was due to file. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair to say. I think whatever is set up, though, should be consistent with the overall. I mean, it wouldn't do much good to stagger if, one utility is coming in October and another one's coming in January. So we would like there to be a set cadence to the, to the filing of the reports, such that, we're essentially doing one utility or at most two utilities per cycle.
Mm-hmm. Eric, morning, sir.
Good morning, everyone. I like the theme on one size not fit all here. And in that context, right, as we are thinking about these updates, and I'm sitting here and thinking about CSNA, Climate Solution Now Act, right, and these updates that are required or being recommended. If we are collectively thinking about how do we provide these updates or touch points, and making sure that we have the flexibility to right size or tune whatever plans that are being proposed, with some of these duration that are being considered, right? That's when I look at some of the goals within Climate Solution Now Act that needs to be met in, say, in the next less than 10 years or 10 year, and we're looking at touch points that are maybe every 3 years or 4 years, whatever it may come to. Is that being taken into consideration, right? Is that adequate time for us to inform all the relevant stakeholders and the commissioners, right, on if the plans are helping us to achieve the goals? Just wanted to share my thoughts with the team as we have those conversations and those recommendations that I'm hearing right now. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts, Judge.
Thank you, sir. All right. So Jacob, just to circle back to you, you would be more, I understand the intent to stagger them. So I'm just trying to think of a way.
I mean, I think,
go ahead.
I think that the month that the process starts in is not as important as the fact that there should be 12 months between the cycles. You know what I mean? Because, what we're envisioning is that the first part of each annual cycle will be the taking of discovery and then the working with the utility to try to reach consensus, or at least identify the areas where no consensus is available. And then there to be a subsequent 6-month period where those non-consensus issues can be handled in some fashion.
Right. Now,
so
just go
to
ahead.
the extent that they overlap with another utility, I think we give up the benefit of having the process occur on a staggered basis.
Right. Now, I was just trying to figure out if we could, work your proposal into what the utilities are currently doing rather than trying to, what it sounds like, maybe possibly change their planning cycles is what it sounds like you are suggesting potentially.
Well, I think we want there to be a regular basis. I understand, like at the very beginning, whatever we come up with is there's going to be some overlap with how the utilities used to do things and how they're going to do things moving forward. I also understand that the utilities might not want to completely change the way they plan these projects, and I realize that some projects have much longer time horizons than others. We do think that will be sort of the learning curve as the DSP process moves forward. Like 10 years from now, I think we'll have a better handle on differentiating between the short, medium, and long-term time horizons for certain projects. We're not envisioning that there would be the situation that I think BGE and the PHI utilities have made about suddenly changing gears about for a project that's like halfway under completion, because in the very beginning I think we would understand that those projects might be able to move forward, even though there might have been modifications made to those proposals if they had been part of the ongoing process like 5 years from now, where we would have seen that project in the 5-year time horizon, and then as we got closer and closer to the actual engineering and implementation, construction, things like that, there would have been the opportunity to have the stakeholder process that we're envisioning.
Okay, all right, thank you, Jacob.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I think one of our, I hear you, Jacob, around that first go around. Certainly, the first go around of this will certainly look different as future go arounds. I think one of the challenges I think we've had and expressed kind of throughout this is many of our different types of projects begin well beyond 5 years. And the ideal time for stakeholder engagement and discussion around those projects or of any project really, is before it even begins. And so that's why within our proposal, we're looking to have those discussions out beyond that 5-year period around some of those projects to get that stakeholder engagement. And so having just a focus on a 5-year plan doesn't give that opportunity to discuss some of those projects that have those longer time horizons. And so that's where, Judge, we've kind of throughout the time kind of really emphasized, if we can have that conversation before any engineering design begins, that's really the ideal place for us to have those discussions.
And again, I just reiterate that it's a straw. So if we want to have the time horizon, the definition of a long-term time horizon be 10 years or however long you guys need to have that discussion, that's fine. That would be fine with us. We understand that some of the massive projects that you're doing, might have time horizons longer than 5 years. So we're not wedded to there, only being a discussion of the projects being planned on, 5 years out. I think you're on mute, Judge.
Sorry. Thanks, Jacob. So would you want the annual review to be of the utilities' long-term plans rather than the mid 5 to 6 year term?
I mean, part of the purpose of the straw was to kind of hear like the feedback. So if we need to have that discussion involve the projects and the medium and long-term horizons, I think that's something that we would be open to. What we want there to be is what's most important to us is that there's a process by which utility decision-making can be influenced by stakeholders. And the thought there would be that we would align the interests of the utilities with the interests of ratepayers and other stakeholders.
Sure. Okay. All right. Thank you. Eric and then Ethan.
Yeah, thanks. Just to add a little bit more to what Jacob Berlin shared from the PHI team. I like to use examples because it helps to me to get the message across a little bit better. So if we were to start the process today, right, what we're saying is like the first 5 years, whatever is in our plans within between now and 5 years from now, that's decisions that have been made already, and the efforts have already started. So those projects within that window would not be under consideration or scrutiny or discussions with the stakeholders.
So you think?
I'm just
I know, I'm
putting
teasing
something
you.
out there, right? Things 5 years or after, right? 5 years or after is what we would be proposing and having some discussions around today. That's sort of a window because we think would be manageable. I like to put numbers and specifics out there. I know it makes the conversation a little bit uncomfortable at times, but I think it helps us to have that difficult conversation around and help to set expectations. So, just curious if there's any concerns around that approach. And as Jacob shared, that would be the initial getting out of the gate, right? And then we would be revving. Everyone would have views within the windshield and be able to make comments on anything that's new after that. Thoughts?
Yeah, so I just like to quickly respond to that. I mean, I think OPC would be open to the idea of there being some type of statement or understanding that the commission signs off on as part of the review of this report or any regulations as far as how the projects that are already in the pipeline will continue to move forward. I think we're flexible on that point. But keying in on something else that that Eric just said, is that the utility's position that they are open to the idea that their decision-making process will be affected by the by the DSP review. Because I know that in the draft report there was some statement that the utilities are open to the idea of there being at least a legislative style hearing, and it wasn't clear to me whether that I didn't actually find that in the straw any of the recent material that I saw from the utilities. Maybe I missed it, but I guess that's one thing that I'm interested in, and then whether that goes as far as to say that the legislative style hearing or whatever type of hearing is held would could lead to a commission decision that would change what the utility otherwise would have done. Because I think that's the crux of at least from my perspective, it seems to me like that's a major point of disagreement between OPC and frankly other stakeholders, non-utility stakeholders, and the utilities.
Jacob, if I can just ask for a clarification, or Jake.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but we've got a Jake and a Jacob, and I'm.
In fact, I'm glad you brought that up, Ethan. Why don't I'll be Jake, and then Jacob Berlin can be Jacob.
Sounds
good. Yeah. As an Ethan, I rarely have this problem, but so what is a legislative style hearing? Just a little bit more. I'm struggling. I'm not sure what that would mean. Not a lawyer type, so
yeah. So I guess I think it's open to interpretation, but I guess there's an idea that maybe it could be like the Empower type hearings versus it being like a rate case.
Okay. Exactly, and I think that was thrown out. That thrown out. The Empower like hearing was suggested, several meetings ago. And I think you're correct. It's much less than a rate case, but more than an administrative meeting. Damon.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
We got you.
Okay. So I think I may have been one of the individuals that sort of mentioned that analogy way back when with Empower, and I think at least the potential model that could be applied here is one of a technical conference whereby utilities present out on their plans, they receive feedback, and then the report back is on how that feedback was incorporated into the planning process. And that ultimately ends in a legislative style hearing where the parties have an opportunity to say thanks or no, the utilities did not incorporate the feedback to the degree that they should have. And then I think to your point, Jake, that may end up resulting in a commission decision. that provides additional direction as to how that feedback should have been incorporated into the planning process.
You know, I appreciate that, Damon. I think we would actually like it to go even further down to the like project or plan level, not just the feedback level, but actually changing the utilities, implementation of specific investments.
Thanks.
And I understand that the utilities don't like that idea.
Yeah, I just, a 6 month long Empower-like proceeding before we can start implementing plans does seem like it would be difficult for us to execute after.
Keeping in mind that this would be a rolling thing. So we would see your longer term projects, we'd see them coming up. And then as they got closer to the engineering phase, we would see them as well. So as time goes on, I think that the concern that you guys have as far as you moving forward in the way these projects are developed, engineered, and then implemented, I think it's consistent with how we're viewing this process working. We're not saying that you would need to pause a project, but rather as part of the your planning process, there would be the input and the possibly a commission decision that would change the way you're actually going to move forward to handle the forecasted increase in load, or to make the engineering decisions, or technological upgrades needed to interconnect DERs or non-wires alternatives.
Hey, Jake, just one thought here, and I hate to sort of brainstorm on the spot, but I guess that's the purpose of the work group. Is there sort of a bucket or a category of projects that OPC feels is clearly off the table from a scope perspective as we sort of just think through this? What buckets? It feels like it's some need a bucket.
I don't know that that I can speak to that. I mean, I think part of that is just my technical my technical ignorance of that sort of thing. I think that obviously the larger the investment and the type of investment that could have been substituted for a less expensive but non-utility implemented solution are the things that I think are going to be the benefit of a DSP process that's not simply done from the utilities within the existing utility mechanisms.
So Jacob, are you?
You mean Jake or Jacob?
OPC Jacob.
Okay.
All right, so are you?
I can change my name in my
No, it's okay. So are you? Or is OPC open to considering the legislative / empower type hearing that Damon had just suggested, but you're more concerned about the order that comes out of whatever proceeding?
That's right. I think that the thing that is most important to us is that if there is a disagreement amongst the parties, there would be an opportunity for all the parties to be heard. So in comments or in testimony, and then there to be a commission decision that the utility is going to do one thing or another. What we would not be comfortable with is for this process just to be an enhanced information, like a sort of behind the scenes look at what the utility is going to do, and the utility is going to do whatever they want to do, and that's just how it's going to be. I mean, that to us is business as usual, and we think that the CSNA is now imposing something different than that, and that the transparency that the act is talking about is transparency that's going to lead to a result that better aligns utility interests with the interests of other stakeholders.
Okay. All right. And let me go back. Hey, Damon, real quick. Following a legislative hearing under your kind of thought process, what do you think would come? What would you expect an order to be from the commission?
Yeah, great question. I'm not sure I've sort of thought through every single aspect of it. I think in the first instance, from a utility planning perspective, the timeline for issuance of that order is always of importance, because the longer it's delayed, the more challenging it is for actually us Sure, and as I think everyone can imagine, some of the lead times for some of the materials we're procuring these days is 2, 3, 4 years, and so it's really challenging if you're not in the queue when you need to be. So I do think the order would at least address, to my earlier point, to the extent there's any disagreement among the parties as to what should be included within certain categories, certain buckets of that long-term distribution plan, then the commission would have an opportunity to weigh in there. I think the hope would be it's not going to be on a micro level. It's going to be on a macro level and provide direction.
Okay.
And there may be a subsequent reporting requirement, right? Meaning you have to report back as to how you incorporated those specific directives.
Okay.
That help? I mean, I think that's sort of how I was thinking about it.
Okay, that helps me at least. And Jacob, that's clearly not Jacob OPC. That's clearly not what you guys are hoping for.
Well, I think that there's going to be a mix. So I think, for certain types of projects that, obviously we're not envisioning a process where we argue over every pole and wire that the utility is planning on putting up. But when it comes to like really large projects like new substations or things that are really going to, be, impactful on rates, to the extent that, non-utility solutions could, meet the whatever is driving the need for the utility's planned, substation upgrade. To me, that might be on a project level, right? Because it might be the construction of a particular project that's going to cost $65 million, whereas there might be a non-utility solution out there that is going to be able to accomplish whatever goal is seeking to be achieved with the construction of that substation, but at a lower cost.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I got a couple hands up. We'll go Jacob and then Al, and then we got a few other folks.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify something.
Jacob.
I want to clarify something because I think the commission in its order made it very clear that they're not looking to manage our plans, right? They said they're not looking for approval before implementation, and then ultimately utilities bear the responsibility and the risk that come with implementing construction plans. So I think from our perspective, we're being responsive to the order in terms of not seeking a process that requires commission approval. And so with what they are looking for is increasing transparency and having stakeholders have the opportunity to have a voice. And I think, throughout this, we've looked and identified several steps throughout the process to engage in that, and allowing stakeholders, staff, all parties to be able to have a voice in that conversation that then can be used to inform the plans that we have, right? We're looking for that comment and that feedback, and we'll certainly take it into consideration and outline even how we would respond to it. But ultimately, I think the commission has been clear in its order that they're not seeking to approve plans before implementation.
Yeah, that was a big point of discussion last week, where I think, and OPC Jacob can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Bill had initially essentially indicated that OPC wanted to revisit that particular issue.
Yeah, certainly. We believe that the CSNA, what the CSNA is trying to accomplish with this, with what is, created this work group's deliberations is something more than just having, a preview of what the higher level preview of what the utility is doing, and then, requiring the utilities to hear what we have to say, but then moving forward anyway, even if, there, would be, approaches that would, better accomplish the CSNA goals. We think that the commission should play a bigger role in, directing the utilities to maybe abandon the approach that they would have liked to or would have chosen to do under business as usual practices, and to do it in a way that moves forward in the direction that the CSNA envisions.
Just a quick clarification, Jake. The CSNA was in place and released when the commission put forward the order for this phase, correct?
I understand that, but we think that we have come up with a straw proposal that addresses what we believe are some of the concerns, and I think the idea of fully litigated proceedings, might there might be a sense that would be like a full blown rate case with multiple rounds of testimony and briefing. But we think that what we're getting at here is that order is not as narrow or prescriptive of this just being an information, an enhanced like informational type proceeding. We think that the CSNA requires something more.
All right, Al.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So it's an important discussion. I think it's great and important that at this point we are looking at, as we have been in much of this discussion, things that we haven't resolved, dates and cycles, for example, relation to MRPs, where they exist, where they don't exist, the nature of the hearing and what commission order might look like. Those things are kind of new ground, or ground that we haven't actually finished. But I'm a little disturbed that we might actually also be trying to relitigate. We're only 4 weeks away from a final report, and it seems to me that we should be working in reference to things that have already been pretty much decided or are reflected in one of the draft reports, including yours, Judge McLean, and the other draft suggestions that I think there are points of consensus that I think we shouldn't be revisiting. I just say this because I was a little concerned when Eric talked about every 5 years, whereas the utilities redlined strawman participation, strawman talks about having reviews at a minimum of every 3 years. And so I just don't want us to be kind of, if we're talking about issues that we have already exhaustively talked about and are included in some of these draft documents, I think we should be referring to those rather than acting as though we're starting from scratch.
I would just like to chime in really quickly, Dr. Bartlett. Thanks for that. I think that there are different time horizons, right? So there might be a planning horizon that is different than the DSP review cycle. And so a DSP review cycle might be picking up on projects that are at various phases of the overall planning horizons, right? So we might see a project in the long-term time horizon in one cycle, and then in a subsequent cycle, maybe 3 years later, we would see that project again, but further along in its process, maybe modified, based on feedback from parties, and then maybe from decisions by the commission on earlier projects that are of similar nature.
Yeah, I can see it. Although the red line participation storming, which I think looks quite good actually at this point, is talking about reviewing the plan. So the difference is, yeah, I understand projects might have a different timeline than plans, but I thought that there was going to be one cycle of plan review process. Sorry, that's me. Yeah.
Well, and to that point, yeah, I mean, maybe there would be decisions made even on a long-term plans, time horizon, but that might not be like the final ruling on that plan, because maybe 10 years out they're planning some massive upgrades, so they put it in the informational filing. We give some feedback on that. Maybe there's some non-consensus, like on some higher level issues, that the utility is going to be, forced to go back to the drawing board on and make modifications. But then as it moves further along and the process, maybe it does come up in the plan again. Again, I think that this whole process is going to be a learning process. What we put out in the straw was from our perspective, which admittedly is not going to be the perspective of the utilities that are actually moving forward on these projects. So I think there's going to be some learning on our side as well. But I think that the process, whatever the process is, it probably does need to involve projects that are planned and implemented on longer time horizons, and that might require, I think, that the projects come up in the same project comes up in different cycles.
Okay, I was just referring to the point that what I thought Eric said from as a utility person was different from what was in the utilities proposal. And again, at this point, I think we should be trying to not rethink the things that we've thought through and come to reasonable consensus on. That's
Al,
sort of where I'm coming from.
Ethan here. I would actually, this is always fun when I get to agree with OPC. I would agree with Jake's interpretation of of Eric's comments. Eric was speaking to just our internal planning cycles. We do it on a 5-year basis. That's just an arbitrary thing. What is in the straw man stance is what our proposal is for this. So just
Okay.
that clarification, wanted to
Thanks.
jump in.
Okay, I stand corrected. Thank you.
All right, Paul.
Yeah, good morning.
Morning, sir.
I'm basically coming where Al is coming from because I was kind of concerned about what Eric said, that basically the first 5 years of projects are off the table and are not available for any kind of comment. Having, been involved with 3 and 5 years would be reasonable. I as a stakeholder would want to know whether there's progress being made to the CSNA goals. And by taking 5 years of projects off the table and not knowing what's going on, you're talking about 2029 or almost up to 2031 without even dealing with any of those CSNA goals. Now, admittedly, I'm not familiar with all the processes that go on with the PSC, and maybe there is some other reporting that provides that, but I look at that as a major whole over the next 5 years of projects, if all of them are off the table. So that's kind of my comment on where Eric appeared to be coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, Eric, want to clear things up for us?
Thanks. Thanks, Judge. I've never been quoted so often in my entire life, but thanks, team. It shows that this is a very collaborative environment and voices are actually being heard. So thanks for that. First and foremost, I'd like to just set the record straight. When I mentioned, for example, the first 5 years, I was not speaking in terms of the cycle for updates on the plan. I was speaking in terms to that when the utilities, and I'm speaking on behalf of BGE, so work with me for a little bit here, right? When we provide our plan, right? And yes, there would be visibility, transparency. That big T transparency we believe is very important here. But when we provide our plan, usually for the first plan that we would provide, usually anything that would be in the plan within the first 5 years would already have gone through engineering and either being in construction or that horse has already gotten out of the gate and is running its race. So what I was saying is that the initial plan, right, from a collaborative and one discussion with stakeholders, that first window of 5 years would already be in flight, and we would prefer that we don't belabor and discuss too much on that, because to the next point I wanted to share is that a lot of that had been covered in the MYP, right? And a lot of data requests would have already taken care of questions from the first 5 years from an MYP perspective. And that's the reason why I was saying, from at least from BG's perspective, is the first 5 years of the window, those projects that would be in flight we wouldn't want to spend too much time on that. I wasn't speaking towards a frequency, and I do hope that provides some clarity. And I do ask if anyone wants me to provide clarity to anything that I've said, just ask. I have no issues with that. So I just wanted to provide some, clear that up. A couple of things. One, Jake, if it's okay for me to quote you in the future that OPC is not interested in every poles and wires, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair, Eric. I think what we've put in our straw was that maybe those those sorts of investments could be reviewed on like a portfolio level. Right. So we might not care about individual poles and wires, but maybe we might care about your total planned list of projects that might involve poles and wires. You can quote me on that.
Thanks. But one more piece I wanted to add is in terms of MYP, right? And for the Exelon utilities, we are presently using an MYP process from a rate, just sharing our plans and having plans in a very regulated, legislative, manner, right? So my question to you, Jake, with BG and PHI, right, already utilizing the MYP process, right, where that includes stakeholders being able to get up on the stand and share their thoughts and things of that nature, and the commissioners listen, and then there's an order or recommendations that comes afterwards. Wouldn't that suffice or help to meet your recommendations or concern for the utilities who are utilizing an MYP, in that we already have a process that meets that, what you were asking for, what's in the straw for you?
So I think that obviously, Eric, there would be overlap, and I think that any effort to kind of synergize the DSP process and MRPs would be helpful. But I would also say that from OPC's perspective, the review of the CapEx in the MYPs leaves a lot to be desired from the ratepayer advocate's perspective, and there's an open issue as to whether the PHI companies, for example, are going to be permitted to move forward with their with MYPs until a statewide process and regulations are put in place to sort of govern how MRPs are going to work. And I think we have, the most important point is I think we need to be mindful that we're coming up with a process that's going to apply statewide. I understand that there could be differences between utilities as to how their specific distribution system planning, their distribution system plans are developed and move forward. But I think what we're trying to do in this work group is come up with a framework and some rules about how DSP is going to work in Maryland, regardless of whether the utility is operating under an MYP or a traditional rate structure.
Thank you for that. But we also understand that each utility works within the confinements of Maryland and the PSC under utilizing different processes and mechanisms. So the DSP needs to be flexible with each utility on which one of the methodology that is adopted as we work with the PSC from a rate perspective.
Well, for example, Eric, if we're talking about a project with a time horizon of 10 years, I mean, that's not going to come up in an MRP.
Right. And that would, and to your point earlier, is that would show up in the DSP, right? And as we get closer to that project actually being included in the MYP, there would have been multiple conversations, multiple inputs happened, and whether there is alignment, agreement, or disalign, things not agreed upon, right? that would be addressed within the MYP period. And leading up to that, also, there would be multiple opportunities for discussion on a project like that. I think that's what you shared earlier that I'm pretty aligned with.
Well, I mean, I think one of the ways that the DSP process and the MRPs could work is that, you know, the planning decisions of projects that are going to later, maybe 8-10 years from now, that are going to be included in an MRP are going to have been discussed and vetted and developed and refined, so that, yeah, by the time we get to the actual MRP where those projects are going to be put into rates, the parties will have been familiar, with them, and maybe that will reduce the burden of the litigation of that MRP, because maybe some of the justifications would be understood by the stakeholders, and that actually might reduce some of the burdens in the MRP. But if you look at our straw, we did take a stab at trying to figure out what the effect of the approval of a plan would be from like a prudence perspective, because it could be that there's a decision that the company, that it's reasonable for the company to move forward on a project. But as far as the actual final prudency review as to whether the full cost recovery that the company is seeking should be put into rates, we do think that needs to be in the rate case, because it could be that the idea was a good idea, but maybe the implementation left something to be desired, and so the cost recovery that the company would want for that project maybe should be subject to either complete disallowance or partial disallowance.
And from a litigation perspective, from a rate case, that's when it really impacts the customers, right? We can put things within the DSP plan, but
well, that's where the cost impacts customers. But as far as the modernization of the grid, allowing DERs to interconnect, things like that, that affects customers too, and that would be covered in the DSP planning process.
Right, but everything has a cost to it. Nothing, so everything gets into the rate case.
Well, I mean, I guess, to the extent that there would be non-utility solutions to some of the things that the utility otherwise would have done, I guess it would be our hope that maybe not all of it would end up in rates, because the utility wouldn't be, wouldn't be implementing every single solution to meet the load projection that.
I understand from an awareness, a data awareness, but if there are any expectations of compensation for non-wire solution, I'm sure there are costs associated with
it. I appreciate that, and yeah, that makes sense. Okay. But instead of the $65 million substation upgrade, it's $45 million, not non-wires alternative.
Right. Sure. I think we're aligned there. But thank you for the healthy discussion on this topic, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to respond to the feedback, to my comments earlier, and just provide some feedback on how DSP and MYP could work together and help with reducing the burden on everyone on data requests at the MYP period, if we have healthy collaborative conversation beforehand within DSP. So thanks. And I think that's one of the huge objective of the DSP also.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Al, you've had your hand up for a little bit, and Ethan, I promise I'll come right back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, and Eric and Jacob too, thank you for clarifying the difference between the planning and the review process. Just a couple of comments. One, in terms of the MRP review incorporating the DSP perspective, that certainly can't happen yet, because we actually haven't established that DSP perspective. That's what we're going to try to do with our recommendations to the commission. And so the criteria by which current MRPs are being looked at certainly does not reflect all the discussions we've had and the recommendations that this working group is going to make. So so we're not there yet. but also I think Paul did a better job than I of framing this question, which has sort of come into focus, which is what is the relationship between the DSP review and the planning process? If the planning process, and particularly, how are we going to get started? Because again, what Eric seemed to say was that the first 5 years are in flight, and so therefore there's nothing to change. But we would expect that the DSP regulations, once established, and the review process of plans under that process would be not delayed for 5 years, that they would start. And so then how do we put the two pieces together? I think that we've actually sort of stumbled onto a really important operational question for the commission, which is how do we get started with this process? Because we really can't wait 5 years to be thinking about implementing distribution system planning, given the 2031 goals and just the need for that to happen. So,
all right, that's a good point, Al. Tim, I'll come to you in a second. Ethan?
Okay, this is a really great discussion. Very impressed by what the ground we're covering very quickly. First,
I can't tell if you're being sarcastic or not.
I'm never sarcastic. No, sarcasm would be dishonest. First, I wanted to just talk about the 5 year to 10 year. I would like to offer an economics concept to kind of help people understand, and a very rarely used but useful economics concept is short, medium, long term. Defined by short term in economics is your ability to change one variable. That's short term. Medium term is the ability to change a certain number of variables, and long term is the ability to change them all. And I think that concept could help people understand where a utility is as far as changing projects. Think of it less as the time frame they're on. The 5 years is kind of an example because that's generally what we say for substations. They're going to be out beyond 5 years when we start planning. But rather the idea that not everything that is already in motion has enough variables left that we can change when we're trying to implement. And most of those variables mean costs, and those costs go to customers. And so a change is something that will be borne by ratepayers. That said, to Paul and Al's concerns, we are already actually working on a lot of the CSNA goals: bidirectionality, DERMS, hosting capacity analysis. These things are already in flight, and they are within the 5 years. And when we get to the reporting phase, we will be able to show you, basically Gantt charts demonstrating where these projects are going, what their timeframes are, what their contingencies and dependencies are. That kind of thing is what we expect a lot of this reporting to be, and what the CSNA directs the commission to be informing the legislature about on an annual basis. So, I hope that helps you understand and perhaps gives you some comfort that those things are a part of what we're thinking about. Jake, OPC.
Hey, Ethan, before you transition, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Okay, so I get what you're saying. So how do you envision, the stakeholder feedback being incorporated in that first, few years?
I'm going to go to Jake on this. It's going to be, there's going to be some lessons learned here. We're going to have, this is going to be a process that's going to be organic. We're going to put out what we have. We're going to have it for stakeholder comment. And one of the things we're going to come back with on occasion, reasons why we did not incorporate, because we've already spent $5 million on this project. It's near completion. Would be probably more than 5 million, since that's actually kind of a small amount for some of the investments we're going to be talking about in this. But that's the kind of thing that we would want to bring back to stakeholders and just be very transparent that this project was already nearly done. It's going to be implemented. And frankly, those projects are going to be ones, and that's going to help with my transition. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, you've got a couple hands. I think I don't know if I've hit a.
I saw Tim and Eric jump in, but I wanted to get to before I give up the mic. I wanted to get to, Jake brought up non-utility solutions. First, Jake, just let me ask you, when you say non-utility solution, do you mean non-wire solution, or do you mean a solution implemented by something other than a utility, another entity?
I think it could be both. I mean, as we, move,
Okay.
And now, to your point about there being like shorter, projects that are already in the pipeline, to me, that would actually come up in the process as like a fact. Like, it doesn't make sense for a project that is maybe where, the shovel's already gone into the ground for the, that, project to cease, right? Because, there's already, that path has already, been taken. But as the years go on, that maybe that project wouldn't have moved forward as it had been, implemented. The same type of project was implemented, 5 years earlier. And that's, I think, what I meant by lessons learned, is that as time goes on, the business as usual type project planning process would be modified. And then what I think would happen is when the utility comes in, they would not come in the way that they had been doing things. They would come in showing like, hey, we needed to meet this load. We would have normally built a substation, but because of the DSP rules and prior commission orders on this, we put out an RFP, and we actually found a solution where we can implement this either through a utility non-wire solution or a non-utilities non-wires alternative that is cheaper and will still accomplish the same goal.
Okay. Jake, I really appreciate you coming to the table today, because this has been an extremely productive conversation. I would like to just help. One of the things I've explained of the previous meetings that I think will help you is there are two different, when we put out, the information we're going to put out is going to include constraints we see on the system that are coming. And, hypothetically, we see 3 data centers coming in Dundalk. Yeah, just the hypothetical 3 Dundalk data centers, and it would require a substation. We're told that these will be 10 years out, okay, as the hypothetical. When we say that that's going to happen, 2 things are going to happen. One, we're going to start planning a substation and non-wire solutions of our own. And those non-wire solutions may or may not be bid out, depending on, what kind of, I actually, Jake, just as an FYI, I'm in charge of our 2 different battery storage projects. One is owned and maintained by Amoresco, and the other is owned and maintained by us. And so, we have experience with both third party and our own non-wire solutions. What the other thing, though, that is going to could happen is conceivably a DER developer who specializes in, say, solar storage could contact those data centers and say, hey, I want to put in a big solar farm with cows wandering underneath the solar panels, and that will be that will show up to us as an offset. So the next year, when you see our next load forecast, our next constraints, we'll say, yeah, there was this thing we were projecting, the 3 Dundalk data centers, but now we have the Dundalk solar panels coming in, and that reduces it. And that means that the project that we would have otherwise planned for there is no longer necessary, because so you see the difference, and why I'm just pointing you to the input and output stage. There are DERs that are inputs to our forecast, which would be the Dundalk solar. And there are DERs that will be the outcomes, the non-wire solutions that we implement to deal with our forecast. And that would be if we were to do something there as part of our planning in lieu of a substation. So I just wanted to clarify that for you, so you understand what our straw man was designed to allow for and create the transparency and stakeholder input. So I just wanted I think this is more of a conversation that, we've about where we want this proceeding to go in the future, but I wanted to get that in your ear now, because you have a pretty good idea of what we're doing, and so I wanted to give you that particular view. I hope.
No, and I appreciate that, and I think what you just said is makes sense. So when you're 10 years out and you see a problem, I mean, it's going to come to you as a problem, right? And then you're going to attempt to solve it, right? And then you're going to say, well, I guess initially you're like, the only way we know how to solve it is what we would do, right? And then and then that could include just the maybe traditional way that the utility would do it, by building a substation, or now hopefully they will, it'll be, well, we could do that, or we could do something cheaper with, some other technology, either, a utility owned piece of equipment, or, put out an RFP for, someone else to come in to do it. Or as you mentioned, maybe the facts will change from the 10 years as, as DERs are interconnecting, and maybe the constraint that you had forecasted now is no longer there because the conditions have changed. And so now that project, maybe it would have been in the very early stages, maybe no land had been purchased or no equipment had been purchased. So there's really very little cost that would have been, incurred relative to the, ultimate cost of the project. And then, what I think that the value of the DSP process will be twofold. One is that as you see what the commission has ruled on in previous cases, that might change the way you start the project in the beginning. And then the second thing is that, there, could be an opportunity where, the utilities, options will be different because there will be, stakeholders that will, be interested at working with the utility or with customers like, the owners of these data centers, to change the, underlying, constraints that, the utility would have seen without this process.
Well, Jake, I really appreciate these moments of alignment and comity, and hope we can continue this discussion because it sounds like this is we could have some real successes here. So appreciate it. I'm going to give up the mic.
Building off of that, I mean, do you see there to be some value in the commission weighing in on this? I mean, it seems to me like you would, right? Because then you would know what the commission would like the utility to do based on, stakeholder input. And then the utility would have, I think, a better sense as to what is going to be acceptable when it comes to a rate filing to recover costs. It seems to me that this actually benefits the utility in a way.
I don't know that we've ever had any problem understanding what the commission directs us to do. They're pretty clear, and having them approve our plans. Having them approve our plans is a step beyond what traditional regulation, what regulation has had before. And I'm going to be, frank with you, Jake. It comes down to a matter of what is our decision point? Where do we take on the risk? That was one of the things that they were clear about in 9777 is that it is our decision and our risk. If, we're willing to take feedback, we're willing to listen to stakeholders and offer transparency, but there comes a point when I have to ask, who else is going to take up the risk and the cost? Because that is still on us. And so that is the imbalance that I see in having the commission approve. I would rather say simply informationally, and we are going to, we will take the feedback, what is useful, we will take and add into our planning, and that will adjust it. And if people don't see that, you can still always file with the commission. Nothing's stopping OPC from doing its role without this being built into the regulations. And because that, I feel, is a step beyond anything we've seen in any proceeding in the U.S. and would just be really imbalance the risk that we take on. So I don't think it's necessary legally or in a regulatory framework, and it will allow, you'll still have the record built for the MYP. If the day comes when we build a substation and you come back and say, we suggested the Dundalk solar panels to go back to the Dundalk solar field instead, and that will be in a record that will already have been created through our filing and our filing of our informational DSP, and you'll have our reasoning for having rejected it, and you'll have that ready, and that will be set up the MYP or rate case, whatever form of final review there is. So I just think it's unnecessary and would create, it would be overly burdensome. But in addition to the fact that I just don't understand how the risk gets allocated under the paradigm you're describing. So.
Well, I mean, I'm going to let others chime in because I know there's a lot
Yeah.
of hands up. But you know, I think that one of the concerns that we always have as ratepayer advocates is the idea of stranded costs for projects that are built and undertaken, and at the time they might have been prudent, but then are no longer used and useful. But the rate impact is the same, that people are paying for it. And I think that to the extent that this DSP process can avoid that outcome, that's a better outcome. And as far as it being burdensome, I mean, I agree that in the sense that that's something different than what the utilities are doing today. But I mean, I think that that's the point of what this work group is all about. That we're changing things, and I think that the net effect is actually not going to be. I mean, and I don't want to get too inflammatory, but I think that there are some benefits to the utility, moving forward with the distribution system plan that has stakeholder input and commission feedback and direction.
Well, let's agree to have further discussions about that.
Yeah.
Okay?
Well, it sounds like they're okay with the feedback and the commission direction, but at a much higher level than what OPC is looking for.
Well, I do think that when it comes down to their, I mean, I think that there could be specific points of disagreement that it's either, it's not going to be a very high level general thing. It's going to be, should we move forward with this project or not? And that, I think the commission should have the opportunity to weigh in before it becomes a stranded asset.
Understood. All right. Tim, I'm sorry, you had your hand up for a long time. Do you have any?
No, I'll give up my point in the order.
Okay. All right. Al.
Actually, I think Eric was before me.
Oh, okay. Eric.
Thank you. You're so generous, Al. I appreciate that. Thanks. Just a few points of clarification, right? Serving a customer, whether it's load or DER, it is not a problem. It's an opportunity to serve from a utility perspective. Just wanted to make sure we understand that it's not a problem. We're here to serve.
I was saying it in a neutral sense that
Okay.
there's something that you needed to do to change, like some future event that would have a negative outcome.
I'm with you, right? It's just I've learned that words are very powerful. So how they're used, it's always helpful just to make sure we have clarity. And second thing I'd like to share is that BGE has been working very hard, and also the PHI team has been working very hard to prepare for this. I think it was Al, I can't remember if it was Al or Paul who asked, right? We are preparing within less than 2 years from now, right, to have our first DSP plan ready for our stakeholders to have some conversation on, right? Keep in mind that we tend to share our dates in a manner that we don't we over deliver and not put ourselves in a bind. But within the next 2 years, we will be ready for that. I'm sharing this to give you all some insights, right, into just trying to help with expectations. And it's interesting, as I said, I stood here listening to Jake. We are aligned in thoughts in more ways than we believe. It's the how, right, that I think we need to just work through. And I'm trying to share that. One, I think most of the utilities have, the urgency is understood, and the urgency, we are putting the work to get there. From a BG perspective, we're committed to having something out there within the next 2 years, right? Hopefully we can do it sooner, but that's sort of where I'm committing my team's promise on that right now, okay? Secondly, over the next 2 years, right, we've already litigated MYP at BGE for 24, 25, 26, right? Hence, when you think of the MYP, the 3-year periods, right, is sort of the reason why I was throwing those numbers out. So for us under DSP umbrella to have some discussions about stuff that has been covered under litigation in MYP may not be in the best interest of our time, you know, and there's a rolling window. There's a rolling window on that, right? So I think when that first plan comes out, right? My ask, I'm not dictating or anything. My ask to the stakeholders is that be understanding of the windows, be understanding of what is already in flow, you know, because not because a substation is not started to build as yet, right? That doesn't mean it hasn't been engineered and designed and equipment has been bought, right? Because I'll give you all an example. It takes us 3 years or more to procure a transformer for substations. 3 years. So, you know, we have to decide that we're going to buy that transformer like 5 years out, right? And it's important for stakeholders to understand that there are decisions that are being made and triggers that are being pulled.
And Eric, that's my point with the stranded asset. I mean, once you move forward, once you purchased it and it's under the transformers being built and maybe shipped to you, it's kind of too late to. I mean, those costs have been incurred. But so what if we were able to tell you 5 years when you were still in the planning stage that no, you don't need to do this or you should do something else and you don't need to buy it in the first place?
And I'm in total alignment with you there, Jake. Right? As I mentioned, it's the first time out of the gate. After that, while it's rolling and you're providing feedback, I'm in total alignment with you. I think we're aligned on that, right? And in addition, right? I've been working with our planners, and I'm gonna tell you, team, right? Planners do not just decide to build things. Is not in their DNA, it's not in their nature, right? They build things, they propose to build things because a customer has requested it, right? So we are customer driven, right? From a capacity perspective, there has to be a request from a customer. And
that's not always going to be the case, though, right?
I mean, just a sec, Jake. And we're seeing trends, right, for the planners to propose, right? They've seen a constraint. The information is saying there's a constraint to propose a solution. Now, Jake, you brought up a good point, right? That there may be opportunities for stakeholders to work with customers or work with the utilities to provide some alternative solutions, right? My understanding is that any solutions that anyone is going to propose on behalf of working with a utility, they expect to be compensated for it. And if the load doesn't come, right, then someone will have a stranded cost. Right. And we will work through that in whatever methods we decide. Right. But just wanted to provide clarity that the planners on the utility side, we do not propose projects that are not customer driven.
Well, when I rudely interrupted you in the middle of what you just said, when I said it's not always true, I mean, there's going to be other types of planning projects that are not customer driven, and I think the sense that you mean. I mean, there might be the replacement of an existing asset that might, be planned, that could possibly be engineered with a different solution, right? I mean, if you're going to replace an aging substation, maybe you could build a smaller one if there was a non-wire solution approach taken. That it wouldn't necessarily be that that you guys are saying, no, we want to build the most expensive thing. I mean, I hear you. I'm taking you at your word that that's not what you would do anyway. But maybe with additional input, you'd be like, oh yeah, we didn't really think of that, or based on that input, we'll see if a different solution is available, and maybe you end up replacing a piece of aging infrastructure with something cheaper, and it's better. It's a better solution for everybody. And the utility might have been willing to do it from the beginning if they had thought of it, or if they had known about those opportunities.
Jake, you and I are in total alignment, okay, from the perspective that in the world that we are operating today, especially with DER, that there may be new opportunities from a solution perspective. We are in total alignment. Whether it's a utility-based non-wire solutions or a customer-based non-wire solution. By the way, you all made me cringe a little bit when you all spoke about data centers and PV, because data center loads are like constant. PV is like only when the sun shines, so we still need to serve the load during the night. So I just
I did say storage, solar storage.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Ethan. As the one who's responsible for the 2 batteries today, I knew where your mind was. But as I say, words are important, and I just like to make sure I set expectations a little bit. But all the conversations we're having here, I think we're so aligned, right? It's just continuing to discussing through those. But hopefully I provided some clarity in regards to one, we are busy working on solutions. We are busy putting new tools in place, and we are busy working to meet some of the key expectations from a DSP in putting a plan out there in less than 24 months, so that we can have a collaborative input feedback from stakeholders, and we work together to help meeting the Climate Solution Now Act goals for the state of Maryland. Thank you.
And just one quick point, to keep in mind, I think from our perspective, is that we're trying to establish a framework that, whenever I'm doing that with the sort of, even though we're not directly a regulator, we recommend to regulators. I deal with like a regulatory mindset where we're sort of setting the field. So I mean, at some point, folks from your engineering team are going to move on, and what if they're replaced by unreasonable versions of yourself? What we're hoping is that there would be a process where the commission could weigh in and basically direct the utility to do something different than they otherwise would do. But it would be our hope that we would never reach that point because of this ongoing process that would be informative and that would align your interests and the interests of stakeholders. Because good engineering practice, might mean different things to other people. It's not it's really not a completely objective standard.
I'm just sharing with you. BG and Exelon takes this very serious. I don't think you will ever have a unreasonable version of myself in this seat.
Well, I would hope that that's not the case, but we need to make regulations in case that's
Understood. This is not a one-person system. It's
See, as long as Eric's reasonable, you don't even need you don't even need your litigated cases. I think that solves everything.
and hey, our straw doesn't call for it. It just gives an opportunity for there to be one if it's needed.
All right.
They just add a piece in the straw. Reasonable.
Reasonable Eric standard.
All right.
Cheers, everyone. Cheers.
Al, do you still have a question or comment, sir?
Yeah, actually, this very interesting conversation has raised a couple of dimensions that, for me, reflect back to the tasks that we actually have, which is to provide recommendations to the commission on regulations that will define what is the content of the DSP process and how it should be applied. And that, in that sense, I reflect back, Judge McLean, to your draft report, which I thought was quite extensive and documenting both the different perspectives that we've been hearing here and also where we come out on those, whether there's consensus or non-consensus, and what those positions would be. But I just wanted to recognize I certainly appreciate and agree with what Eric and Ethan have said about the utilities are already thinking about it and working on some of the aspects that are going to be critical for distribution system planning. At the same time, as we've reviewed, going back to phase one, the current process that the utilities have, we found that it doesn't incorporate all of the aspects of distribution system planning that need to be incorporated, whether it's, for example, DER forecasting, which only one of the utilities presently has, and that was actually limited to existing capacity, wasn't looking at additional capacity requirements. We've talked about hosting capacity, upgrades and right sizing and all those things that's not part of the planning process now. So what Eric is saying is, for example, when he talks about the planning process being customer driven, there are going to be other aspects which OPC Jake has been talking about, like DER forecasting or EV forecasting, that will change from a purely customer driven approach to a foreseeable future driven approach that will need to be reflected in DS planning. And that's what we're supposed to write down and suggest to the commission that they actually incorporate into the process. The only other thing I would add is that Ethan again referred to all the risk and what's going to go into the ratepayers' responsibility to pay for. But there are, as we move into the distribution system modernization, there are going to be other resources. There already are other resources, federal funds, but there's also going to be private investment, for example, in a big battery storage program that would also have grid benefits. And so we're talking about, and we've been talking about for 2 years now, ways that thinking about the future of the grid is going to change the way that we actually plan. And that's what we're supposed to be writing down. So I'm just hoping that we can keep having these discussions, but it really in the end comes back to the fact that what we're trying to do is to structure a process that's different from what we do now, but that will be responsive and build on what the utilities have already undertaken, but that will actually systematize that and establish the requirements for that.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Bartlett. Sean.
All right, hopefully my camera comes on here. Hey, good to see everybody. Thank you. I just wanted to come on here, a couple things. Also with the concern that I've joined the group late, so out of risk of bringing up stuff that's already been decided, and I know it's getting close to lunch. I don't want to stand in the way of anybody's food, but I kind of think like what I'm getting from this really productive conversation is that it seems to be the biggest contention is kind of this difference between whether or not a DSP plan should ultimately have to be approved by the commission and whether there should be some sort of mechanism for an opportunity for litigation or discovery. So that's kind of my understanding, and maybe somebody can clarify if I'm on the right track. The one thing I wanted to jump on too is just so Jake doesn't feel like he's out here on an island. I've been really feel like I'm on board with so much of what he said in all this process. And I just wanted clarification too from maybe Ethan. You brought up this point, which is a very good point on risk that the utility takes on through the rate making process. I was hoping you could clarify that because you've suggested a couple of times who else would take on this risk beside the utility. I really have a hard time as a regulatory guy thinking who would ever take on risk besides the utility, right? Because none of us are taking on the part of your ROE. I'm not trying to be snide, but that you know what I'm getting at, and you should fairly be rewarded for such risk. And I'll be upfront with that. So maybe you could clarify on that. But my last point is, and I guess these are less points. I'm asking questions. At least from Advanced Energy United standpoint, I think the OPC standpoint, our goal ultimately is never to add more cost that would come on the ratepayers. We want this whole process to actually mitigate future costs, right? Jake mentioned we don't want stranded costs out there. So those are kind of my thoughts from United's perspective. And again, thank you, everybody. Really, I feel like it's been a great conversation today.
All right, thanks, Sean. And I think at least with the proceeding, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a question of should the commission approve it? If so, what kind of level of approval are they looking for should be done? What the litigation or hearing should look like, and the discovery. I think the discovery point is not an issue, but I think it's just really what a hearing's going to look like and what kind of level of commission input or approval is going to be necessary or envisioned by the parties. With that, Ethan, I know you got referenced a few times, so I'll let you run with it.
I did just speak to the risk. First off, we have, we take the risk we make an investment and then we go to a rate case. Was it prudent? Do we get recovery on it? That is one risk we take on. We also, and this is one of the things that very much worries us about the idea of a approval system that is, third-party approval of our distribution plans and changes to it. If we are ordered not to do something that we think is necessary, and then there is a outage, there is a fire, we are responsible for the reliability and safety of the system. I say that so often in conferences that it's actually a laugh line. You start out a conference and you say to the conferencees, we're the utilities, we are responsible for. And we say it so often because it's true. And it is a big risk that we take on, and it is a big responsibility to maintain the safety of our system. These are massive amounts of energy we are directing safely day by day in what I consider a modern miracle. And, when we add, we're here to, as Eric was very eloquent about pointing out, we're here to serve our customers, and those customers are anybody from the people who are simply at the end of our distribution system, taking their day-to-day, their electricity, to the developers who are coming on and adding DERs to our system that add backflows. And we build our system around those backflows as well in order to maintain the safety for everyone so that those DERs can operate, so that they can do their part in this greening of the grid. And so that is the risk we take on for everyone else. It's, and so, Sean, I don't really know what your organization's background is, but if you represent DER developers, we're here to work with you. And we're here to develop the system out in such a way that it is a benefit to you. We maintain an ecology. And I consider us in many ways to be like foresters. We're out there maintaining the system that a bunch of different beings live in and operate out of every day, and hopefully they don't even notice we exist if we're doing our job right. So those are our risks and our reason for being, and I hope that helps you. And if you'd like to explain your organization's, point of view, I would really appreciate understanding what it is. I always like to understand what my stakeholders are looking to get, because there may be something we can talk about where we can meet you in the middle. So
That sounds
appreciate.
good. Yeah, Judge McLean, you want me to have the floor again?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I mean, for the group, I probably failed to do this earlier, but we're an industry association. We represent kind of the whole gamut of clean energy companies, and DER included, Ethan. And our general mission is that we all want to work towards a system that's 100% clean energy, electrified transportation. Within that, we do understand that ratepayer affordability is a big issue, and anything that moves towards unaffordability makes our mission harder. So that's ultimately where we come from. So we love that invitation to work together. I know we've had issues scheduling, so we're definitely on board with that. And I used to work for a utility. I definitely understand the risk. I was thinking more also from the perspective is that if you have an approved DSP plan, and I assume when you say third-party approval, you strictly mean the PSC, because I don't think the OPC, and we definitely don't ever claim that we'd have approval authority, right? We're just one input in our opinion. But when I'm thinking of risk, I'm thinking you mean like risk of collection. So you have that huge risk of disallowances within a rate case, right? And I think that's always going to be your risk. And the rate making process should fairly reward you for that risk. But my thought is that with an approved DSP process, that kind of eliminates some of that disapproval, or what was the word I used before, through the where you're not allowed recovery of something. So if you have that in hand, if an issue does happen in the future, you got disapproval from the PSC. So we're not trying to make your risk worse there.
All right. Thank you, sir. Jacob, PHI.
Yeah, I actually I wanted to follow up on something Al had said, and I think it's something he's said over the last couple meetings actually around, what we're working towards is some level of recommendations for the DSP process. And as much as possible, trying to capture some language that reflects what consensus we've landed on in terms of those recommendations to be able to put forth some type of recommendations. Now, I think even last meeting you said capturing that, and then obviously if there's not consensus within those, trying to capture that. And so I just want to touch on that. One of the documents I think Ethan had sent around yesterday was our attempt to try and do that, trying to go through the record from comments and the draft reports to say what were some of those general consensus items. How do we start to take all this, pages and pages of discussion and hours of discussion and turn them into recommendation language around those general consensus. And so that was our attempt to start to pull that together, Al, and try and reflect really what that conversation has been and what does that language start to look like as we transition from discussing the JADE process map, discussing the CSNA, and eventually translating that into COMAR regulation. So just wanted to follow up on Al's point there, because that's that some of his conversations was part of the genesis of that document.
Okay, so Jacob, before you turn your camera off, does Ethan feel like there's any more need for discussion, either probably not for the whole group, but offline with OPC Jacob, as to where, how to move forward, if there's any kind of area for consensus? I mean, based on the conversations, previously and today, my impression would be no, but
I never like to close in a negotiation space.
Okay.
And this is for Jake OPC. By the way, I keep thinking of the movie The Two Jakes.
Which wasn't very good, as I recall.
No, it wasn't one of Nicholson's best. Really not since Chinatown. Anyway, I believe in the idea of negotiation space. And oftentimes when you are playing tug of war, like we are now a little bit over this commission proceeding, we're looking at this very linearly. And I would like to, I appreciate Jake's being willing to sit down with the utilities and discuss this further. And maybe we can add a third dimension and expand the negotiation space into another area where maybe we're not pushing and pulling over this one thing, but we can find another area. Because he mentioned something that really struck me and kind of concerned me, that the MYP CapEx review is not being as informative as you need. And if that is a negotiation space where we can accommodate you in some way and better inform the MYP stakeholders such that we don't need this additional level of proceeding in here, I think that would be a good area for us to move into if we could have that conversation or a similar conversation. So, Jake, I'd really like to, offer you that conversation, and we'll bring our MYP team to see what we can work out, and I'll bring some of our planners as well, and see what it is that you're missing and how we could possibly accommodate you there, and maybe that would satisfy you. So, putting that out there as an idea.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Ethan. I think the problem with the MRP is that by the time we're talking about the projects in the MRP, it's way past what this DSP was hoping to accomplish, right? I mean, you're talking about projects that are already well underway.
And that would be something that we could offer in the DSP process that would inform you then, that would save you the need for commission approval during the DSP. Is a way to, reduce the burden on everyone, to go back to your phrase. So just keep that in mind. Hopefully we can have that conversation.
The other thing, Ethan, is that while our office always participates in MRP, there's a lot of stakeholders on this call that I've never seen in a rate case, and I doubt I ever will. So I think that, that your suggestion there, I mean, with the way I see it is working the other way, that the DSP will help make it easier and maybe increase the transparency benefit that you guys claim is provided through the MRP process. Because the first time we're hearing about a project won't be when you guys are including it in an MRP, but we'll have been familiar with it because it was brought up at the 10-year mark and then the 5-year,
And just to be clear, we've already offered to, be transparent about our projects going forward as part of the DSP. So that's already on the table.
Yeah, but I guess, one of the main points in contention is that you might have told us about it, but there's no opportunity to change your mind about it, or for the commission to weigh in a way that will change what you're going to do anyway.
Well, I was hoping that there would our good faith effort here to show the number of points in our straw man for transparency would demonstrate that we are willing to, because we're going to be putting it out there that we're taking this information. And if we, if we show bad faith, you're going to have a record of that. And I certainly don't intend to show bad faith. So.
All right, thanks, fellas.
But to your larger point about negotiation space, I mean, we're, like I said at the beginning of the call, we're willing and still planning on having a meeting. So if you guys still want it, we'll include you.
Absolutely. And, again, we've given the way the conversation ended last week with Mr. Fields, the only space that he was willing to talk about was the timing. So if we're expanding the conversation, I'm all for it.
All right, thanks, fellas. Al.
Yeah, a couple of things, and I appreciate Ethan clarifying his support of the red line version of the participation straw man that the utilities did, because that's quite clear in referring to a plan. At one point, Ethan referred to it as the report, which was the old language, but what that red line document does is say that, yes, there is opportunity for stakeholders, OPC and everybody else to interact with the plan. And I think that's the forward-looking dimension that we were looking for. And I see Jacob nodding. That's great. I would just say, in terms of the new document that Jacob referred to, since we've now got another summary document on the table, having looked at that last night and again today, it's got some it's again at a very high level. I certainly would not replace Judge McLean, your report with that report, because you offer a lot more detail on the discussions that happened in the background, each of the recommendations or points that you summarize. My recommendation would be that your report, as it's finalized, along with the OPC summary report, the now the utilities summary report, and the metrics piece all go in as annexes to your larger report, so that the commission has them in hand to consider. And perhaps if you, when you get a chance to look at the new one, the utilities you put in, if there are any points that they raise that are now non-consensus or something, that be recognized in your report. But I think that your report actually should stand as it is, and that these other pieces of input just be made available to the commission for their consideration.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Al. We got Jacob, OPC Jacob, and then PHI Jacob.
Okay, yeah, thanks, John. Dr. Bartlett's comments just reminded me of something, and that is, how were you expecting the parties to give you comments on the draft report? Were we going to, excuse me, talk about that today, or do you want us to sort of redline it like Dr. Bartlett had done? Because we actually had some things we wanted to ask about the draft report.
Right. No, I loved it how Dr. Bartlett did it. That's how I've done it with previous work groups. It just, I mean, what were you envisioning, a different process?
No, I just, I think my understanding was that we were going to, I guess, I don't know that this was said, but I thought we might be just going through the report and kind of chiming in as we got to different sections. But, you know, we're certainly willing to, you know, put comment bubbles in a document and then just circulate it.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent we have some time, if you guys want to go through, I mean, there's at least one thing I wanted to bring up, maybe post lunch, that Dr. Bartlett had raised. I think maybe the way I phrased something, I misunderstood it. So, but why don't we put a pin in that, Jacob, and we'll come back after lunch, and we can talk about. I'd like to talk about BG, the joint utilities documents they sent around yesterday. Maybe they can walk us through them since we got them yesterday. Maybe not everyone's had an opportunity to look at it. PHI, Jacob, did you want to?
Yeah, and I had one question about the timing for the draft feedback, so I can wait for that until after lunch while we're having that conversation. But then just wanted to follow up on Al. To be clear, was not trying to replace the full report, was really just trying to say, you know, where were the points of general consensus and how does that start to turn into COMAR looking language, right? Obviously, it would have to be tweaked to actually fit what may be in COMAR, but how do we start to translate all those discussions and all those consensus points into language that would start to feed into COMAR? So that was the intent of that document. So by no means not trying to replace the report in any way.
Yeah, if that was the intent, I wish you would have told me a long time ago, because it's been spent a lot of time on this thing. So, all right, why don't we take, it's 1 o'clock, and thank you again for starting late today. I wasn't sure how long my hearing was going to go. So, Ethan, how long would you like for lunch, sir? Ethan, you there? All right, why don't we take 45 minutes? We'll see everybody back at 1:45.